Hello, everyone. My name is Jesse Zhu. So I am currently, well, for the reasons of presenting here, I use social media, specifically YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, to spread information, mainly firearms-based content, but at the same time, my focus is on Asian Americans and really coverage of what we do in the industry. So I tend to, on top of firearms education, highlight the other Asian Americans in the firearms industry, people that you don't know actually run or own these companies, as well as take on a little bit of education outside the firearms realm using the platform. In this case, hate crimes. So a little bit of background on myself. I've basically served the government for my entire career. I've worked for fairly large three-letter agencies. Out in my time, I've served 12 years on the federal realm, and now I've shifted over to the California side to work on hate crimes itself. I can't name my agency. I'm not authorized to, but I can basically provide you with the information that is presented here. So I'm speaking to you as directly as a subject matter expert on this subject. So we will be covering both the federal definitions as well as California side, so you can understand the gravity of hate crimes and realistically how big and small what's going on it really is. So we're going to get started with the presentation. I'll go ahead and turn off my video and start the screen share now. Okay, so this is the understanding and reporting of hate crimes. This is my information down here. My social media handle is bunny_operator. Don't mind the name. It doesn't mean anything. It was just a random name that we picked and just kind of ran with it. And I guess it's kind of catchy, but we'll figure that out later. All right, on to the first slide. We're going to the definitions of a hate crime. So what is a hate crime? The federal definition is under Title 18 of the U.S. Constitution of subsection 249 under the Hate Crimes Act. So it's basically, it has to be a statutory crime based on, within a bias by the offender, essentially, in whole or in part. So that's typically by race, which is what we're talking about, but it also includes religion, disabilities, whether it be mental or physical disabilities, sexual orientation, ethnicity, national origin. So you don't actually have to be like an Asian. You can be from a different country. You can be like anti-Canadian, and that, I guess that counts. Your gender or gender identity, these two were recently added within the last few years or so. Now, what's important here is that the offender's perception of the victim is enough to satisfy, even if the victim does not have the perceived characteristic. Meaning, I can see Coy and think that he's Hispanic and give him a Hispanic racial slur, and that still is enough to constitute a hate crime, because it doesn't matter what Coy actually is. It only matters what I perceive him as, and the fact that a bias was applied towards the crime. Certain human trafficking, slavery, domestic violence incidents also can be classified as hate crimes. Okay, what I mean by that is some very large-scale human trafficking situations, they specifically target females, for example, or in some other cases, they target males, and that's basically, it's a crime being committed with a bias. So you think of situations like that. Slavery, domestic violence, same situation. California copies the federal definition. So backtracking a little bit, the FBI on the federal level handles all hate crimes in the United States. If a state chooses to handle hate crimes on their own, they must adopt the system and basically mirror the FBI's standards, and that's usually how it goes. In this case, California does do that, as they do with many other things. So California's Penal Code 422.55 in the statute, a hate crime is basically, it is a criminal act in whole and part because of one or more of the following actual perceived characteristics of the victim. So you see that California actually codifies the term perceived. In the federal definition, it doesn't actually have it in there, but it is the assumption of it. So it's, again, it's slightly different order, but it's disability, gender, nationality, race, or ethnicity, religion, or sexual orientation. But for today, what we're going to focus on is race, specifically because we are focusing on Asian content. So California additionally adds that subsection 7 here is association with a person or group with one or more of the actual perceived characteristics is enough to be a victim of a hate crime. What that means is if you are not necessarily of the characteristic, that the criminal is has a bias against, but you were supporting them in some type of event, and they attack you or they commit a crime against you based on your association with that group, it is enough to substantiate a hate crime, and then you would be a victim of a hate crime. The most common type of charges are all in the 422.6 A and B category. So A is generally crimes against persons, and then B is property damage, crimes against property, if you will. So note that here, the force or threat of force, such as intimidation, is sufficient. So they don't actually have to physically attack you. Intimidation is sufficient to substantiate a hate crime. So this screen here is actually from the Department of Justice's website, the California Department of Justice. This is part of a brochure that can be given out and distributed to your community should you want to. And this is basically describing what I just explained earlier through definitions. So the most common types of hate crimes, property crimes. So vandalism, destruction, damage, theft, burglary, arson, anything associated with property so long as it does not have a direct person involved. So meaning if somebody damages your vehicle, or somebody graffitis your house or your business, that's enough. Burglary with the specifically targeting Asian Americans, for example, as we've seen in the last few years or so, home invasions with an anti-Asian bias because they're specifically targeting Asians would be one of those incidents. Arson by itself without injury to a person is considered as a property crime. Crimes against persons. So again, threats, intimidation, harassing letters, text messages, emails, anything electronic, phone calls, and such is considered and as substantiates a hate crime, or can rather. So assault and battery. I want to be clear here that the definitions in California for assault and battery vary, or rather those definitions vary across state lines, but for California, assault is the attempt of battery. Battery is the actual physical contact with a person. So if somebody hits you, pushes you, even if they poke their finger at you, that is enough to substantiate battery. Spraying water at you is enough to substantiate battery. Assault is the attempt of it. But for hate crimes definitions themselves, the way that it's reported, it would be considered as a simple assault. But we'll get into that later. Assault with a deadly weapon, that is basically its attempt of battery with anything that's capable of maiming you, which is known as great bodily injury, or has the ability to kill you, basically. Robbery is basically theft against a person or using fear or force. So they don't actually have to physically assault you. They can threaten you. The point is that if you're in fear for your safety and they take something from you, that is what constitutes as a robbery. And then rape and murder, these are two very, very high level crimes here, but those are definitely on the list here. So why does this matter? Why does this presentation and education matter for the community? The census releases surveys out to collect demographics on the United States. And then they do it about every 10 years or so. And the 2020 is the most latest data sample that we have here. So currently the U.S. population has over 331 million persons in the United States. And Asians alone, meaning one demographic. So you notice Asian alone. If you click on the census link down here, it's two or more races, so Asian plus something else. Then there would be more than the 19 million that's shown, almost 20 million. So that's approximately 6% of the U.S. population is Asian alone. So if we add the other races or the other mixtures, then it's probably more than that. In California, the 2020 estimated population, according to the U.S. Census, is about 39 million, almost 40 million Asians are in the state of California, according to the U.S. Census. The population of California is 39 million. Asian alone in the state of California is 6 million. So that's 15, almost 16% of California's population is Asian alone. And that's 30% of the nation's Asian population. So almost 1/3 of the nation is in California for the Asian population. So to confirm this, the California side has also done this demographical survey, and we are about the same. We're close to 40 million Asians in the state of California. So that confirms that. So that means we should have the highest sample to basically mirror what's going on for the rest of the nation, for the most part. Now, the 2021 data from California was recently released, and it's still pretty close. We're still near 40 million, but there is a, 400,000 difference. So that's probably due to the recent exodus that we've seen from people leaving the state. But that's just a little bit of extra tidbit for you. But basically, our demographic hasn't changed that much. So, based on those statistics here, so just remember them as we go through this. California, the Department of Justice in 2021 has released a special report specifically regarding anti-Asian bias hate crimes. And it contains all of 2020 data back to 2016, I believe. And these are official police reports, meaning only known to law enforcement. So these are the official reports. So people actually have called in and requested an officer, and they've come out to take the report. This is available via the Open Justice portal, which is the Department of Justice's statistical portal, if you will. So it was reported that in 2020, there was an increase of 107% in total anti-Asian hate crimes as compared to 2019. That sounds like a lot. But when you look at the actual numbers, it's 43 to 89. So you have to be careful when agencies and really entities anywhere use percentages as well as averages, because there are mean, medium, and mode as far as averages go. So we need to be very clear about what the stats actually mean. So when they say 107%, it does sound like a lot, but when you look at the actual numbers, it's 43 to 89. So that's 10% of hate crimes with an anti-Asian bias, or rather anti-race bias, for that year. So most commonly reported anti-Asian hate crimes between 2016 and 2020, that's 5 years of data, has been violent crime, which is approximately 80%. And then that was increased from 127% from 2016 to 2020. When you look at the actual numbers, 2016 showed 32 versus 2020, which shows 72. Now, I don't want to downplay it, and nobody should have to go through this, but I want you to see the actual numbers to understand that the numbers are insignificant statistically. And there is a method to this, which we'll get into it shortly. So property crimes increased by 55% from 2016 to 2020. The actual numbers are from 11 to 17. So an increase of 55% sounds like a lot until you look at the actual numbers. That's a 6 count difference between the 4 years. Rather, the 5 years, or 4 years. And the most common type of property damage was graffiti, vandalism, destruction. Just basically petty, somebody was angry and they just did something silly and added a bias to it. So most anti-Asian hate crimes within the state of California targeted individuals, meaning persons, just everyday people walking down the street. Most of the victims were adults over the age of 18, and 101 persons were targeted in 2020. That does not constitute individual hate crimes, but sometimes there are multiple persons involved per individual incident. It shows a 102% increase since 2019. So in 2019, there were 50 victims of hate crimes. And here is a screenshot from the actual report. Again, the link is here, which will be available to you once we're done with the presentation. So here are the actual numbers that were presented, and you can see here that in 2016, the numbers kind of range and they stabilize. From 2016, it goes up and stabilizes, goes down a little bit, and it goes back up to 50. And then 2020, there was a jump for obvious reasons, because the coronavirus situation seemed to have amplified the situation. So now moving on to the federal statistics from the FBI in 2018. This is through the FBI UCR, or the Universal Crime Report. It matches, just like the California Department of Justice side, this is only what's known to law enforcement, so officially reported. So 16,000 agencies participated across the United States. So about 7,000 single bias hate crimes were reported. 57, almost 56% were motivated by race, ethnicity, and ancestry bias. There were 84 multiple bias incidents, meaning it's something like anti-Asian plus anti-male, or it can be anti-Asian plus anti-sexual orientation or similar. Almost 5,000 hate crimes were considered as race and single bias, okay? And I want to note this because it just gives us a cleaner number to look at. So out of that, almost 50% were anti-black, 20% were anti-white, 13% were anti-Hispanic, 3.5% was anti-Asian bias, and that's 148 incidents as confirmed in the UCR tables. And there are other races involved and such too, but this is what we're focusing on, essentially the main four. So you can see here that out of that near 5,000, only 148 incidents. So that's 3.5%. So again, statistically, it's insignificant when in comparison to the other races that were involved. As of 2019, about the same, 7,000 cases. There were more multiple bias incidents. And as far as hate crimes go with race, it went down a little bit by 200 or so, but that's insignificant statistically. So you see the anti-black was about the same, anti-white went down a little bit, anti-Hispanic is about the same, and anti-Asian went up 1% from 148 to 158. So 10 more incidents reported between the year. Again, statistically insignificant as far as what we're talking about. And 2020 data was recently released by the FBI. The tables aren't published yet, but they were able to release a report. So hate crimes went up to about 8,000 or so, and 5,000 racially motivated. So you can see that anti-black went down a little bit, anti-white was down a little bit, anti-Hispanic went down a little bit, but anti-Asian went up. But out of the percentage between the actual total of races, it's 3%. So it did go up, but you can see that it's still statistically insignificant in comparison to the others. And this time around, the UCR included offender ethnicity, so we can actually track what demographics are specifically targeting anti-Asians, or rather specifically targeting Asians or the other races. So I want you all to understand that you can go to these resources and find the demographics that you want. It doesn't have to be Asian, we're just focusing on Asians for the purpose of this presentation. So the victims are not reporting to law enforcement. Okay, so we obviously have seen higher increases in reporting through social media, through mainstream media, but we're going to get into that and explain possibly why that's going on. So there's a term that's known as the dark matter of crime. There is a National Crime Victim Survey, which is similar to the census that the FBI releases, or one of their divisions releases. And what it is it is a self-reporting survey where victims or persons that take the survey, they self-report their crime or crimes that occurred to them. And the last publication was June 2017 with 2004 to 2015 data. So that's all we got to work with right now. So victims of hate crimes often don't report their victimization to local law enforcement agencies, resulting in the underreporting of hate crimes. And how do we know that it's being underreported? Well, because of the FBI UCR. The UCR, the Universal Crime Report, is only known to law enforcement, and this is self-victim report. So if you actually look at the numbers for these years and compare them against the federal data, you can see that there's a large gap between self-reported crimes versus officially reported. And what that means is that gap in the middle, we have to find out why. Why aren't they reporting to police agencies? Well, one of the reasons is cultural barriers. As far as us Asians, we have this cultural thing where we want to be good Asians, quote unquote good Asians. We don't want any trouble. We just kind of want to be left alone. Nothing will happen anyways. There's a natural distrust of government by a lot of Asian cultures, just because a lot of them have immigrated from countries that were a lot more oppressive in their control of the people. There are language barriers that can occur. People don't understand English enough or just don't understand the concepts enough to report it. Again, the lack of public education on the subjects, including this hate crimes, or even how to report a crime in general, how to even work with government agencies. And there's a lack of community involvement or willingness to report. What I mean by this is our local communities don't provide this education to each other, even though we are the first and forefront of education distribution within ourselves. So the result is that the Asian community is underrepresented in the stats, right? Because it sounds like everything right now is fantastical. The numbers are skyrocketing, that everyone's getting attacked every day, and that may be so. but these stats don't represent that, and that's a problem. So maybe all this was good because we were the model minority, the quote-unquote model minorities, but that behavior, which also led to a lot of successes within the Asian community, has also become detrimental to the Asian community in the long run. To add on to that, the government will not and does not respond with additional resources without statistical data to support the need for the resources. What that means is we saw that in the FBI stats, there was approximately 40-50% of race-based crimes were anti-Black, when 3 to 4% is anti-Asian. So if there's funding available to stop hate crimes, where do you think the funding will be focused on? Probably in the African American communities to help combat those situations. So again, this is being a good Asian, and that mentality has created detrimental issues with modern day Asian communities. So how do we fix this? We know that our stats need to go up, not necessarily the increase in crime. I don't mean that more victims have to occur. I just mean that our stats have to match the actual crime that's going on. Cultural barriers. We can help educate the community through your family, through your friends, through your direct peers. Right? So it starts with you. You can advocate and encourage reporting when something happens instead of the barriers that occur, especially from the older generation that doesn't want to report. They don't want any problems. You can change the culture within. Okay, that's where it starts. It always starts from within. So we are Americans for the most part, or we're in America, and we need to make the effort to understand how America and the system, our Constitution, works in order to benefit ourselves, not as individuals, but also as a community as a whole. That's the only way that we're going to thrive in this country, is that we get the entire community to understand the actual laws and the Constitution and what our rights are. Language barriers. You can help translate within your circle. Okay? If you can speak the language, help them. The California Department of Justice also has brochures available in multiple languages. So you can see here, this is a multitude listing, including languages that I didn't even know existed, honestly, but it's all here. So really, a lot of especially the more large-scale Asian populations that speak specific languages, there's no excuse for the language barriers anymore because it's all available. The government entities have always had these pamphlets and information available in multiple languages, just nobody wants to utilize them, or rather even read them or distribute them to their own people. A lack of public education on the subject. Well, the federal, state, and local government agencies have these resources available to you. You just need to go and acquire them in order to distribute them for yourselves. Nonprofit organizations, advocacy groups, individuals, social media personalities, whatever you want that's out there that's doing these things. Your next guest is Rick Tran of All American Safety, and he's one of my buddies out there. He does a great job at doing this type of services. He actually makes a lot of videos in Vietnamese. And it's kind of funny because a lot of his content is in Vietnamese, so he gets a lot of followers and commenters from Vietnam direct. They actually have nothing to do, for the most part, with what we're doing, but he gets a lot of feedback from there. So maybe if you go watch his videos, you can send it to some of your persons that don't speak English very well. Seniors Fight Back is another organization. They're a more recent startup. Hong Lee is the head of that one. She was leading that one. She was a victim of a hate crime incident back in August 2020. It went viral. I don't know if you recall that, but she was in a restaurant, and I believe he was a large African-American gentleman, basically asked her for her number. She said no, and that she was married, and then so he started berating her and calling her all these racial slurs. He didn't really threaten her, but he was like posting up, if you will, in a threatening manner, but there wasn't actually anything said that was a criminal threat. And she, in my interview with her, she said that she was scared to not report the situation because she felt like a victim and that nothing would be done. And she wasn't sure, but her husband convinced her to report the incident and bring it to the news media. And she told me at the time that LAPD, she did call them, LAPD showed up and told her that there was nothing they can do about it because there wasn't a crime. And their handling the situation was completely wrong based on my understanding of how this process should be. So she reported it, and it went viral, went through the news media outlets, and it caused LAPD to retrain that officer, to rechange their policies. And she actually got in contact with the head of the LAPD Hate Crimes Task Force to take her case directly. Granted, there wasn't enough information to make hers a hate crime, but it was recorded as a hate crime, rather a hate incident, which is it's a racial slur, derogatory verbal assaults without an actual crime occurring. That's what a hate incident is. And this caused other victims to come forward, and what this ultimately led to was criminal apprehension of the subject, and he's facing criminal charges now by the LA District Attorney, as well as she provided an outlet for these other victims to come forward. So you see, all it took was one person to be brave and actually share their story and report it to the authorities and take action when authorities don't actually do anything about it. So she took action, and it actually made a difference in the community. And now she started Seniors Fight Back, and they're a large organization, nonprofit. They've received awards from the California Senate, rather the state of California, as well as on the national level. So, you know, I'm proud of Hong for what she's done, and really, it's a really inspiring story. And I hope that you all do go research Seniors Fight Back to see her story for yourselves. And there are various other Asian-based organizations that can help you out there, as well as other organizations. So when in doubt, you need to feel out these organizations and make sure that what they're providing for you is actually legitimate. There are a lot of social media influencers out there, news media outlets, especially because they are beholden to their editors and their funders, is that basically you need to be careful with what information they're giving to you, not just the statistical information, but also because they might just be doing it for ratings, or they might be doing it for clout. Like you see the mainstream media right now is pushing a lot of these incidents that occur, but they don't actually provide you with resources to help combat the situation. They always report that when an Asian person is attacked, but they don't give you an outlet. So what do you do if you get attacked? So it doesn't help you. So, you know, you just be cautious with what's out there. Okay, moving on here. The lack of community involvement, or the lack of willingness to report. So you can change that attitude. You can lead by example. You can take charge of the situation. You can be the advocate for your immediate circle. You can be the change that you want to see. So it always starts with you here. You're the ones that are receiving this information now. It's up to you to take it and pass it on to your immediate people. Then eventually your neighborhood, your neighbors, and the rest of your community. Only then can you really band together at a large scale. So change doesn't happen from top up and down. It happens from bottom up. That's how the grassroots organizations start. We saw recently that at the national level, there was an anti-hate crime act at the national level, which didn't do anything to curb hate crimes. It didn't stop any anti-Asian bias hate crimes at all. It was a feel-good measure done by the political folks up there just to gain ratings and votes. Realistically, that's just exactly what it was, because there were already hate crimes on the books. So adding more to the statute is not going to change anything, because by definition, criminals don't follow the law. Again, change starts at the local level and not at the legislative level. But you can bring the ground level to the legislative level in order to create and pass laws that do actually matter. So what should you do when a hate crime occurs? Victims of hate crimes are strongly encouraged to contact their local agency immediately. Hey, just the moment you get your head straight, contact them immediately. So call 911 and have somebody else call for you. You can call the non-emergency lines for your local agencies if you're not sure about something, but when in doubt, call 911. They will direct you to the right people. Give me a good drink of water here real quick, excuse me. Okay. Victims should also get medical attention if they need it. Write down the exact words and other factual data that, if you have the opportunity to, save it all as evidence, because all of this matters, okay? The difference between a hate crime and not a hate crime is very, very dependent on you as the victim and based on your memory of the situation, okay? If it's safe to do so, wait around for law enforcement to arrive, especially if it's what's known as a hot call. A hot call is an active, ongoing situation. Take photos of any evidence if you can, damage to property, damage to yourself, any injuries. Get the names and contact information of all victims, all other victims, and witnesses that are around the scene that have decided to help out. Try to get your best description of the suspect and or the vehicle. Okay, that is very important to the conclusion to the case. A lot of times, crime cases are not solved because there's no suspect description. And that's very important. Okay, contact your local community organizations in your area for additional resources and assistance. If you have a local Asian, or not even doesn't have to be Asian, just locals community support, just use all the resources that are available to you. So this is another brochure image from the California Department of Justice. This is basically exactly what I just stated, just in official format. So we're going to move on to victims' rights. This is known as Marsy's Law. What is law enforcement, specifically California law enforcement? What are they required to provide to you, being a victim of a hate crime? Well, excuse me, just being a victim in general. So the Victims' Bill of Rights was passed in 2008. It's known as Marsy's Law. It's under the California Constitution. And you can find it through the California Department of Justice's website or directly through Marsy's Law. Currently, there are only a few states that have adopted this, but California was one of the forefronts. So a little bit of backstory here. Marsy was a 21-year-old UC Santa Barbara student who was stalked and killed by her ex-boyfriend in 1983. 1 week after the murder, Marsy's mother was confronted by the murderer, by the suspect, by her murderer. She didn't know that the suspect had been released on bail, on bond, if you will. And the courts at the time didn't have any obligation to let the family of the victim notify them of the release of the accused person. And the approval of Marsy's Law, the codification of it into the California Constitution, mandates this. Courts must now take into consideration the safety of the victims and the family when setting bail and release conditions. So we'll get into the rights here. There are 17 codified rights, victim bill of rights in the California Constitution. So you have a right to be treated fairly and with respect, with your dignity and your privacy and all that. You have the right to be free from intimidation, harassment, and abuse throughout the entire criminal process. Meaning, the law enforcement officials of the government entities cannot give you crap, really, for being a victim. They can't roll their eyes at you. They can't just brush you off if you have a concern. That's what that means. Okay? And you have a right to your privacy from that, meaning all your information is secured. This is the reason why, even though California and the national level, the Freedom of Information Act, as well as the California Public Rights Act is what it's known as, you as a victim have a right to have your information blocked off. So meaning the suspect, as well as the suspect's attorney, cannot subpoena for that actual for the crime, for the actual criminal document, and your information will be there. It must be redacted before it's distributed. And you have a right to be reasonably protected from the defendant or the accused and anyone acting on behalf of the defendant. Their family members, their friends, their quote unquote their homies can't come after you because you have a right to that. So if they do that, it's a criminal act on them. You have a right to be safe. Your family and your story can. You have a right to have your story considered in the fixation of the bail amount and the release conditions. So meaning you have a right to attend the trial and argue against releasing the suspect on bail. So again, the prevention of disclosure of confidential information such as your records to anyone. So the defendant, their attorney, and any other person acting on their behalf, they can't have the information. They can't find out where you live. They can't go up and try to persuade you not to testify. So here's the pamphlet from the California Department of Justice containing a different situation here. We're talking about the difference between hate crime and hate incident. So a hate crime, again, going back to the first definition, it has to be a criminal act in the statute and it has to have a bias. That's it. That's basically the conditions. A hate incident can have a bias, but an actual criminal act has not occurred. So simply calling you a racial slur by itself is insufficient to create, to substantiate a hate crime because we have First Amendment rights for freedom of expression in the United States. So we can say things like something offensive about a religion, but we can't get arrested for that. It's not a citation. It's not a criminal act. Okay. So a hate incidents change to a hate crime the moment a perceived threat, or any type of damage to property, any type of criminal act occurs. Okay, that's the main difference. So the Department of Justice listed incidents here. So display of offensive material on one's own property, even in public property. So we noticed this with like the West Baptist Church that was protesting military funerals by using anti-gay posters and derogatory information. They have a First Amendment right. They can do that. It's completely legal for them to do that. But the moment they threaten somebody to do that, then it becomes a hate crime. Posting hate material does not result in property damage is one example. Distribution of materials with hate messages in public places, also a hate incident. Again, until a crime occurs, it's just First Amendment rights. Should you report a hate incident? Yes, you should. Documenting a hate incident via official channels, meaning actually reporting it, creates a paper trail on the subject or subjects should future incidents occur. And that can potentially help future people, but also future incidents with other people can help solve your crime. So it's cyclical in that aspect. One example is a suspect approaches an Asian person and says, "I hate you, chinks. I wish you would go back to your country," then walks away. Is that a hate crime or a hate incident? Well, the suspect didn't commit a crime. They are protected by the First Amendment, that's free speech, and can express themselves however they want to, so long as they don't commit a crime in the process. The same suspect later physically attacks another Asian person, but doesn't say anything to the victim. The suspect committed a crime, but no bias was identified in this specific incident. But let's say that suspect was apprehended for that battery. A hate incident report can be the difference between identifying hate crime or not. So that suspect was apprehended in the second case, but in the first example, this person did not report the incident, which would have linked to that suspect. So let's think about this situation here. That person would have gotten away, but wouldn't have gotten a hate crime enhancement, which is a higher tier of crime. But if they did, then the arresting persons or the hate crimes task forces for those respective agencies could have connected the two and used the first person's incident to make it a hate crime for the second incident, and at the same time also solve the first person's incident as a hate crime, or potentially a hate crime. So you're thinking about that situation here. Again, it's cyclical. That reporting is so important, it's so vital, that it not just affects you and your situation, it affects everybody else in your community. This is why it's so important that this education gets out to you and the people around you. When in doubt, just report it, even if nothing results from it. Okay, the fact that you are reporting it, you are making an official report. They are mandated to take the report. All right, I know that some police officers that you have had made contact with are they might seem lazy, but they are required to take a report. So you need to push it, okay? Even if they say, okay, but if I take a report, it's not going to do anything, you have to tell them, yes, I want to make a report. So they have to do it. If they won't take it at the field, there is an incident number for that. They are required to give you an incident number. You can still get their information if you want to, but you can still go down to the local police department and actually report it there. Okay, but it all starts with you. I know it shouldn't be this way, but you have to do your due diligence in order to get the government to act and actually hold them accountable for their misactions. Just like in Hong Lee's case from earlier, right? The responding officer didn't do anything, so she took it upon herself to actually rise to the occasion and do what was necessary. That's pretty much it for the presentation itself. These are the resources that are available to you. The U.S. Census, if you want to go there. The FBI's website has specific hate crimes information. They have their own page dedicated to hate crimes, as well as the hate crime statistics from the FBI Universal Crime Report. The California Department of Justice, directly through the Office of Attorney General's website, as well as their Open Justice Portal, which is a California version of the FBI UCR. California's Marsy's Law is also has its own dedicated page on the Department of Justice's website, or rather the Office of Attorney General's website. So feel free to use all those resources available to you, read them and understand them, because they are the difference between you getting what's right for you and the government entity and anyone else just letting go. Excuse me. Rick Tran is your next guest here. His information is here and available to you. So if you watch his presentation in about a week or so, or whenever that occurs, then his information is here for you. He was also interviewed for my channel, so if you want more background information on him, as well as myself, you can head over to my pages and check out those videos as well. My email's here in case you have direct questions and you don't have any of these social media handles. I get it. Some people don't like social media. I get it. Then you can email me directly, and then we can go from there. I'll be more than happy to be a resource for you. If you want me to present for your local entities, feel free to reach out to you. I'll be more than happy to do that. So here is the cover for Rick's interview if you want to go to him, and as well as my logo. There he goes. See, again, ignore the name itself. It doesn't mean anything. It's just there to catch attention because it was silly, and you can ignore this portion too. But that is it for the presentation. I'll go ahead and stop sharing for now. We can open up for questions.